Hi, it's Helen Tarrant. Welcome to another episode of Commercial Property Roadshow. You're here with Helen Tarrant, and today I'm going to talk about increasing yield for your commercial property. Now, most people increasing yield is about increasing the rent for your property. So as the rents go up in commercial, so does the value of your property. So it's all about how do you increase rent. And so as a result, how do you increase the net yield? And then follow on from that is then the value of your property goes up. Now, that all sounds really great in theory, but in practice, the way to increase rent is actually by increasing or finding more lettable areas. So that may be if you're in a warehouse property, building a mezzanine floor, but make sure the mezzanine floor has to be compliant. Or alternatively, if you are finding a retail space or even an office space, there might be storage cages, there might be car spaces that you can rent out. Or if you have a freestanding building, there may be signage that you can apply if you're in a main road area, or you might be able to have spaces in retail shops for ATMs, or sometimes they even have these new Bitcoin machines, or any kind of things that you can put there that gives you a few $1,000s a year. And while these few $1,000s don't seem like a lot, if you have your main rent and then you have bits and pieces that add each a few $1,000s, ultimately that may end up being a 10% or 20% increase to your rentals that you're getting. So for example, you have $30,000 as your net rent and you bought this property at a 6% yield at $500,000. Now if you manage to go out and get another, a car space rented out, or an ATM, or some signage, or bits and pieces, or storage cages, so all coming into here, and you added another $6,000 a year, so that's actually a 20% increase in your net rent. So instead of $30,000, now you get $36,000 a year. Now $36,000 firstly means more cash flow into your pocket, because you're still paying the bank exactly the same amount of money. You now have $6,000 extra that's coming in, which may pay for a holiday, or it may pay for payments towards a new car, or a new renovation to the house or something. So it certainly does add up. But the thing is, now that also flows on to adding value to your property. So adding value to your property, now that extra $6,000, what that equates to, if you're looking at a $36,000 now net rent, is that your property is now worth somewhere in the vicinity of $600,000, maybe $580,000 to $600,000. So you've added $80,000 to $100,000 in terms of the value to the property. So this might be a good time for you to consider, I can refinance, or I can sell, take out that money as if it's a chunk deal, and go again for my next property. But in theory, that is all really good. And when you look at properties on paper you can go, oh, I can do this, I can do that, I can identify these. But in reality, how does that actually work? And does finding a property that is lower rent than market, so say the tenant's paying below market rent, is that a really good idea at this time? Well, in this current market, the answer is no, because we've gone through COVID. It is a renter's market. So a tenant can literally get up, even if they have a fit out cost. So even if they spend a lot of money on fit out, let's say they spend $50,000 on fit out, someone else may, in the future, say someone like a developer has developed a brand new lot of buildings, and they've got retail shops down the bottom. They might entice that tenant by doing a brand new fit out for them to move. Or alternatively, the tenant might decide that, okay, well, they might go to a smaller premise that's charging them less rent, or they might go somewhere else which is exactly the same size but less rent as well. So at the moment, because it's a renter's market and there's more supply in the market than demand, and that's across the board, just because we've gone through COVID, no matter what type of commercial property you're in, it actually doesn't bode well to buy below market rented properties, because you're going to have to wait out minimum of 2 years for you to be able to capitalize on the potential of it. Now, great, if you have a potential for that property, so if you are a long-term hold and you go, that's okay, the first 2 years doesn't matter, I'm looking at what's going to happen in year 5 and 6 and 10, then that's no issue, because ultimately in 5 years time, 2 years time, 3 years time, you can bring the rent up and be able to then increase the value of the property. But the thing is, when you bring the rent up, it's not going to be, all right, so let's say the market rent is $40,000 and the tenant's paying $30,000. There's a $10,000 gap. It's unlikely in the first market review your tenant's going to be able to jump from $30,000 to $40,000, because that is huge. That is equivalent to like a 30% increase in rent. But that's going to have to be done over time, and it may take you a 5-year period for your tenant to actually bring the rent up to market, which means that you're essentially waiting 2 years for the market to correct itself and then 5 years to come to market rent. So it's maybe a 7-year journey. So buying under market rented properties right now, if you don't have a long-term strategy, does not mean you are going to be able to capitalize on the growth potential of that property in a short space of time. So really for you, the next thing for you to look at is to find properties with potential new lettable areas for you to rent. And to buy, so that you can actually rent out to potential new tenants. So one of the big things you can do is find warehouse spaces that is without a mezzanine floor, build the mezzanine floor, which will be a capital cost to you, make sure it's all compliant, and work out whether you can get a separate entrance to the warehouse so that you can add a new tenancy up there. And that means you actually now have more lettable area. The other thing is to look at potentially maybe an extension out the back. So, for example, you have maybe a freestanding building or a little freestanding residential that's converted to commercial, and you have a commercial tenant in the front who may be using it as a showroom, a cafe, even like an area where, let's say that they're not a cafe, they might be allied health or something. Well, there might be an area that you can enclose, or you might be able to extend on in the back end. So what does that mean? That means that in the back there may be a little alcove that you might be able to create to another consulting room. You might be able to enclose it for storage. So if you had accounting or legal tenants, they may be willing to pay for additional storage at the back if you create it for them. Alternatively, you may be able to create some storage space at the back by enclosing an alcove and creating another entrance, so you can rent out that as storage sheds. So that's another option. So finding more lettable areas in a premise is going to be, at this current market, the best way for you to actually increase the rental yield and the value of your property. And also because in this current market, people are looking for smaller premises, more versatility. Being able to break up a large premise into 2 or 3 smaller ones is really going to give you the added advantage, and also make you charge a little bit more than what the market is charging, because you've got a smaller property, and it's harder to find a smaller property in this current market than large ones. So I think moving forward, if you're looking at more rentable spaces and increase on rental yields, you've got to look at areas, or you've got to look at spaces in your commercial property that you can actually enclose or rent out separately. So car spaces as one, anything you can enclose into storage cage as a second, any areas at the back you can close into storage sheds or consulting rooms, or anything else you can rent out is another one. And then of course looking at the traditional ones like signage, ATMs, and anything else that like mezzanine floors for warehouse type properties. So if you want to look at a project like this is not about going on the shelf and just picking off a set and forget. There's actually a process of working through how much capital cost you need to put in, how much advertising, what kind of incentives, are you going to disturb the front tenant when you do that? All of that comes into consideration and a plan. So it's not just about buying that set and forget property, it's a set and forget property with a little twist in it. So, but if you're looking for help in that area, and that is the strategy you want to use for commercial property, reach out to me at helentarrant.com or email me at helen@commercialpropertycashflow, and we can jump on a strategy call and I can explain and see if the strategy actually worked for you. But in the meantime, hit the bell and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.